There will be a huge work to be done here. We will have 7 reports. Please keep the timing. And I would like to give the floor right now to Artem Kuzovlev, Director of the Nilashevsky Research Institute of General Reanimatology. Hello, dear colleagues. It's morning in Moscow right now. I'm glad to welcome you, all the participants. But I would like to ask the organizers to switch off the translation, because I cannot talk like that, hearing the translation at the same time. I'm welcoming the participants and online guests. Today we will have a very important session, training for remote healthcare, the theories behind the reality. And I think the reports will be very interesting because the speakers belong to different associations from Great Britain, from Russia, Italy, and this means that there is a lot to be discussed in terms of educating for remote healthcare. So since we don't have too much time, I suggest we get to the reports. Please remember that you have not more than 15 minutes for your report and about 2 minutes for the Q&A session. And I think organizers will support us if some of the online participants has a question. We can collect them and then discuss them at the end of the session. So we shall open our session with the first report by Professor Andrew Lockie, Vice President of the British Resuscitation
and theories behind reality. Доброе утро. Спасибо большое, что дали мне возможность выступить на этой конференции. Для меня большая честь
healthcare. And in particular, I'd like to talk to you about the theories behind the reality and why we actually teach as we teach. My name is Andy Lockie, and my conflict of interest is I have several roles within the resuscitation community. I'm Vice President of Resuscitation Council UK, and I'm a member of various committees for the European Resuscitation Council. Critically, I've been involved for many years teaching resuscitation in your country. So I've taught many courses for advanced life support and generic instructor courses in Moscow. And so I have a great affinity with the way that you teach, and I'm very, very grateful for the opportunities that has given me as well. My background is that I am a medical educationalist. So I'm a consultant in emergency medicine, but for many years I have specialized in medical education, and in particular looking at the theories behind why we teach. Why is this important? Well, it's very important because, as this slide says, one size does not fit all. People learn in different ways. There are many people talk about learning styles, and that's a little bit controversial within the educational community because it's not really that simple. It's not as simple as saying somebody learns best by reading, somebody learns best by hearing. It's not binary. All of us have different abilities to learn over the different modalities in different proportions. So we all have different learning styles and different preferences. Why is that important? Well, it's important that when we design teaching programs, when we create the instructional design, we need to reflect the fact that our learners have got many different needs. So we cannot just teach one way of teaching because that may exclude a certain proportion of the learners. And in particular, when you're talking about a remote healthcare setting, where the support may be online and may not be immediately available, it's important that we don't exclude those learners from important learning objectives. Within the European Resuscitation Council, we have a specific approach to education for all of our courses. And I'm grateful to my colleague, Patricia Conahan, who has also taught in Russia as well. She designed and devised this approach, this concept for an approach to education involving 4 different aspects. The idea, so educational theories, inquiry, the research that underpins what we do, because education is not just about doing what we feel is right, it's what we know is right from the research. Implementation, so looking how we take the research and translate it into actual teaching, and very importantly, looking at the impact in terms of the educational outcomes, and also with clinical education, with the outcomes of patients. But for this talk, I'm going to focus on that top left quadrant around educational theory to attempt to explain how we learn. So what do we mean by educational theory? As you would expect, it isn't simple. The scientific study of human learning using educational psychology dates back over 2,000 years in Plato. And over the intervening years, and in particular over the last 100 years, many different educational theories have been proposed. And these explain the application, the interpretation, and the purpose of learning and education. So there are many, many different theories that you will hear about that have been developed all around the world. In essence, we can probably split these into 3 broad categories. So there are the theories that are teacher-centered, otherwise known as pedagogy. There are the theories that are learner-centered, otherwise known as andragogy. And recently described are the theories that are learner-led, known as heutagogy. The majority of theories fall under 4 broad approaches, namely behaviorism, constructivism, cognitivism, and connectivism. And these theories overlap because they all describe similar approaches to learning, but with different emphases. And this is a diagram that I proposed a couple of years ago, which shows the connectivity between these various theories. So the behaviorist theory and the cognitivist theory are 2 ends of a spectrum, and the overlap between them is detailed by the constructivist theory, and in particular there's the social constructivist theory applicable to resuscitation courses. And then right in the center is the connectivist theory. And I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about each of these theories so that you can understand why they are relevant to how you teach healthcare in remote settings. So first of all, I'd like to say a few words about behaviorism. So the behaviorist theory was proposed primarily by Skinner back in the 1950s and the 1960s. This is a classically pedagogical approach. In other words, it is teacher-centered. Think back to when you were at school. Rows of children in a classroom with a teacher at the front of the room. The teacher is telling the children what the facts are. The teacher is telling the children what they need to learn. The students, the pupils, they are like blank canvases. In other words, they need to absorb all of this new information. So in this particular approach to learning, the learner is passive and the teacher is in charge. And it's defined as a change in behavior in the desired direction. And the principle behind behaviorism is the use of positive and negative reinforcement. So you'll notice as well, Pavlov is one of the inspirations behind behaviorism, because the experiments that Pavlov did used positive and negative reinforcement, and that is classic behaviorism. There are many advantages to this approach, is to master the various steps before moving on to the next steps. The disadvantage is that negative reinforcement may be needed, in particular with adult learners who already have pre-existing views. But there are many ways in modern education that we still use behaviorism. Behaviorism has gone out of vogue, mainly because educationalists prefer andragogical approaches to learning. But behaviorism is not all bad. There are still great advantages to behaviorism, and particularly in time-limited circumstances where you need to be able to transmit information for learning in a direct way. But I'll come back in a few minutes to talk about how that impacts upon remote healthcare. Moving to the other end of that spectrum is cognitivism. And this was devised by people including Ausubel, Piaget, and Bloom. And you see here, the definition here is that cognitivism is something that focuses on the processes involved in learning. This is an andragogical approach, so it is learner-centered. The learner is the focus of the learning in this, and it really looks around the process of how they learn. It's the use of cognitive tools like insight, information processing, use of perception, and use of memory. And it involves the acquiring, storing, and retrieving of information. In essence, the teacher facilitates the learner to learn how to learn. So it's quite complex, but it is really good in situations where there's a need to process and retrieve information. But this is a process of learning that cannot be observed directly. Moving on to constructivism, another andragogical approach, learner-centered. And this is really where a lot of healthcare education is based, their own understanding and knowledge through experiencing things and reflecting on those experiences. It allows students to work together, and it helps with their self-confidence. And they can bring their prior learning to the classroom, the behaviorist approach. So it allows different expertise to contribute. Some people prefer just to be told what to do, and so they may get frustrated with constructivism. And in its purest sense, constructivism, the teacher should be totally passive, which may be a problem if there are time limitations to the learning event. Finally, and most importantly for remote learning, is connectivism. And this has really taken flight over the last 15 to 20 years with the advent of the internet and social media. This is where the learner is heutagogical, it is learner-led. So essentially, it's where the learner can go to seek out the learning themselves. They can use the internet, they can use social media, they can use blogs and vlogs, they can talk to their colleagues. They don't have to be sat in a classroom. They choose what they learn, when they learn, how fast they learn, and where they learn. So they have complete control. Obviously not good for learners who prefer direct contact with teachers, but this really is the future of education at the moment. So how is this relevant to remote healthcare? Well, as I've mentioned, the various different approaches, there are various aspects such as lectures, repeated practice, rote learning that reflect behaviorism. And a lot of simulation training reflects behaviorism. It uses positive reinforcement, you did that well, or negative reinforcement, you made a mistake, let's go back and start again. So there are positives to behaviorism that we use in healthcare. A lot of healthcare education uses constructivism, as I already suggested, like shared learning, briefing, debriefing, and simulation, and feedback and spaced learning. And as I've just mentioned, connectivism has really added value to education, and in particular in remote environments where you cannot get the teacher to the student, connectivism really helps support the student to drive their own learning. So in summary, that's been a very rapid journey through 4 important educational theoretical approaches. Within the ERC, the application of educational theory is a core component, and we use it for instructional design of courses. The important thing to remember is that each theory has got a strength to it, and it's important to use the strengths of each theory to create that diverse framework of teaching strategies, because that way we're more likely to cover all of the learning opportunities for all of our course participants. Technology in particular has offered us exciting new opportunities, which particularly benefit those in remote healthcare environments. And the use of online platforms and connection to many nodes of information has really helped learners in those situations. So thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you today. I hope that that's been educational for you, and I wish you a very happy and a very good conference. Thank you very much.
Доклад на крайне сложную тему.
That was a very background information, which is a theory that is sometimes very difficult to comprehend, but nevertheless very necessary. I don't see any questions.
So, dear colleagues, we shall continue. The next report will be also quite interesting, especially in the modern time. It is called Simulation Medical Training from the Perspective of Evidence-Based Medicine. The report will be made by Artem Kuzovlev, head of the Negovsky Research Institute of General Reanimatology, Doctor of Medical Sciences. Artem, you have the floor. I'm glad to welcome all the participants. I will try to slightly reduce my presentation in order to fit it within the agenda. Do you see my presentation on the screen? Okay, thank you. Within this session, we are quite successful in discussing simulation education within remote healthcare. But we try to discuss it from the position of evidence-based medicine. We will hear the position of the General International Board, the European Association of Heart, that are quite similar. Of course, the basis was laid quite a long time ago, in the 50s, by the outstanding scientists Migursky and Sakharov, that jointly came up with an idea of resuscitating people and formed the foundation for educating the medical people in this methodology. Right now, at present, there are different recommendations on the resuscitation. In my report, I am based on the American European Resuscitation Council, and on their guidelines. So this is the education for resuscitation, and I'm telling you, if you really want to know more about resuscitation, how to educate for resuscitation, please read these guidelines. They are quite useful and interesting. There is no evidence for all the items within the resuscitation focus. since it is very difficult and the research itself is quite complicated, it is a well-known concept that if we want to increase the survival rate of our patients, this shall be all the elements shall be united into one block: education, implementation, medical science, all combined together will increase the survival rate. Talking about different educational theories, we say that we use the elements of various educational theories, different teaching methods. And it's very important to use a blended approach or a mixed approach adapted to specific audience and to specific case. This is the basis for the modern evidence-based medicine. There are 5 fundamental principles that we need to follow that are key and critical in educating for resuscitation, especially in remote healthcare facilities. It is clear that all experts should possess the basic knowledge on resuscitation. A very important aspect applies to non-medical professionals. This is easy, this is simple, this is acceptable, easy to teach and easy to accept, to learn, to gain the knowledge. This is for both adult and child resuscitation. For medical workers, the set of skills is much larger. It is extended compared to non-medical professionals. There is an evidence-based framework for different target groups. If we talk about non-medical professionals, especially training for resuscitation, it is very important to work with their motivation, to teach basic things like the survival chain, to provide them with the necessary devices such as feedback. This fosters the assimilation of knowledge and accumulation of skills, which is called spaced learning in English. The education is spread in time. Like every week, 1 hour, and the assimilation of information is quite faster and more efficient. There are many technologies facilitating this process, but when we talk about the medical workers, here we need to teach specific skills like ALS, ALS, PBLS, PALS. These are the abbreviations of the European Council for Resuscitation. They are slightly different from the American Association for Heart. It is also very important that those shall be formal certified courses with simulation sessions and so on. For medical workers, it is advisable to use different checklists, tips, and algorithms, and debriefing technology. The use of algorithms has its pros and cons. The advantages include the reduction of cognitive load, the decision-making process is improved in the condition of distress and time deficit, but the disadvantages are also there. The communication between group members may be disturbed. Different schemes and algorithms can distract the attention from the main topic and reduce the quality of service. We analyze separately the recommendations published in the Elsevier journal about the effect of team and leadership training of advanced life support providers on patient outcomes. Debriefing is a very powerful tool, and there are different debriefing technologies. Debriefing shall be used both during training and in real life. If there is a resuscitation case in a remote site, we need to discuss it first, what happened. So there are different debriefing technologies like sandwich plus delta, advocacy and inquiry, and learning conversation that is widely used in Russia. There are different debriefing stages, and this is a separate topic. Here the task is to train the instructors, but this is not the topic of our today's discussion. All these technologies, learning technologies, equipment is embedded into the course structure. Any course, any learning shall its specific structure, and first of all, we aim at certain knowledge obtained by our students or trainees. However, there are different opinions with regard to this method. But for teaching practical skills, we use this four-stage method. Definitely, based on my experience at basic courses and in the courses for adult and child resuscitation, there are no evidence-based data that this method cannot be used. This method allows mastering the skill and using this in the practice. There are other methods, such as the rapid cycle. When you follow this circle, you give a simple skill, then there is a short debriefing, then you give a more serious task, and then they again discuss it. And this methodology was developed in by John Hopkins, and this is recommended by the European Council for Resuscitation. Professor Loginov already говорил about the importance of e-learning technologies. These are the technologies that are becoming part of our daily life. A few reports today will be devoted to this interesting topic. It is very important that this is not just a mere text downloaded to a website, but an interactive e-learning environment with tests, videos, and so on. There are more complicated technologies, virtual technologies, augmented reality, and so on. But there is no much evidence-based framework for them. Probably if there is no possibility to have offline courses, this is a good alternative. But again, we highlight all the time that it is very important, again, at least to ensure the simulation practice using the mannequin. Simulation technologies should use the simplest equipment, while there are some advanced courses where the equipment can be more sophisticated, because simple technologies allow better simulating the knowledge and master the obtained skills. Don't make your work too complicated. Teacher training is a very complicated issue as well. It is clear that we need to do this within the framework of structured courses. The European Council for Resuscitation has generic instructor course and basic life support instructor courses. And right now, they are reviewing the programs and curricular and approaches they are using. What our educational courses influence the clinical outcomes? First, these are the advanced resuscitation and remote resuscitation courses. There is an evidence-based framework and which confirms that the participation in those courses has some impact on the final outcome. That is why I extremely recommend you to pass certified courses only. Again, your training and regular retraining is the basis for supporting your practical skills in good shape. And this is the visual cycle of continuous learning from medical people. This is nothing new. We work within the system of continuous medical education. There are also some recommendations for pedagogical control. Usually pedagogical control is continuous with certain checklists and so on. And again, by concluding my report, I'm asking you, especially those that are involved in teaching, please read this section that reflects the details of all the researches regarding the training for resuscitation at the courses of the European Resuscitation Council. The principles are quite simple. Shall be a unity of science, educational technologies, and implementation of this in practice. And only the use of effective and evidence-based pedagogical tools will make it possible to improve the survival rate, including in remote industrial objects. Talking about the simulation discipline, these methods and approaches are quite the same, and you can transmit them to other courses as well. So I'm using this opportunity to invite you to the international conference devoted to the critical states and survivability that will be held in November. And I'm thankful for your attention. I try to save some time for a Q&A session and for other reports. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Thank you, Artyom. You have access to Q&A. Is there anything in the chat? There are no questions so far. I have one question. You mentioned the European Council for Resuscitation and the guidelines that they developed. Do we have something similar, like the analog of these recommendations that we can refer to in our work? This is a very important question. Right now at our institute we're developing methodical recommendations, as we call them, on resuscitation. Unfortunately, according to our legislation, they cannot be clinical. That is why they're called methodical. And I hope this year we will coordinate them with the Ministry of Health of the Russian Federation, and they will be approved. The issues of teaching and learning also require certain regulation. There is a committee on education, and in the future we plan to tackle this issue as well. Thank you, Artyom. We have one question from the audience. My name is Piotr Inisiewski, health manager. Can you tell me when they will train all the medical staff in Russia using the certified courses, so that they will get not a simple certificates not needed, but something similar to European or American certificates? Why am I asking this question? Unfortunately, what is happening in Russia, they take, for example, the European guidelines or American guidelines, and then someone takes out the key points out of those recommendations. I will give you an example. In 2018, like the resuscitation was not dealing with cardiology or some other acute diseases. Someone decided that this should be excluded from the agenda. But to my understanding, this should be a very comprehensive integrated course covering all these European guidelines, so that the surgeons, therapists, all that have, so that in the hospital they will not start running around when the person has problems with the heart, looking for the resuscitologist. But the doctors any doctor is able to do the necessary measures himself. I fully agree with you. We need to develop something similar for the Russian reality that should be placed in the electronic library of the Ministry of Health of the Russian Federation. As a skill, this is included in the standard of the Russian Federation. But I fully agree with this is an international session. I would not distinguish between basic and advanced resuscitation. The guidelines are the same. The American Heart Association and the European Council for Resuscitation, they talk pretty much about the same things. I think we need to move further and get to the next report, if you don't mind. If there are some questions, please put them in the chat box. So we shall move to the third report. The report will be made by Marina Stracha
Американской ассоциации сердца,
of the American Heart Association, our colleague from Italy, and it is called American Heart Association Digital Transformation. Go ahead, please. Can you hear us? Yeah. We can't hear you, unfortunately. You can. Yes, yes. Please go ahead. Здравствуйте. Вам видно? Слышно? Все хорошо? Я начинаю. Здравствуйте, меня зовут Марина Страча. Она меня слышит опять? Okay, you can hear the translation, yes? Okay. Ага. И я работаю в Американской ассоциации сердца как международный консультант. Для меня большая честь выступить на этой конференции. Наша глобальная миссия — это спасение жизни. Я буду рассказывать о том, как мы разрабатываем руководство guidelines. И до того, как я расскажу больше о процессе, я расскажу, как мы разрабатываем информацию. Сначала мы исследуем уже имеющиеся научные труды, и члены комиссии ИЛькор используют свои рекомендации и уже дальше адаптируют их для АХА, для Американской ассоциации сердца, для различных региональных использований. Мы используем формулу Эйнштейна для того, чтобы повысить уровень выживаемости после сердечно-сосудистых заболеваний. В 2020 году мы обновили наши рекомендации на основании самых последних исследований и внесли туда дополнительные всеобъемлющие рекомендации. Мы даем рекомендации для разных тренинговых курсов по всему миру. Наша главная цель — это повысить выживаемость после инфарктов. Для наших студентов и для студентов, которые используют эти курсы, которые рекомендуются Американской ассоциацией сердца, мы стараемся сделать так, чтобы самые обоснованные и доказательные подходы были использованы для исследований.
Programs. Our programs are built on the newest clinical science. And delivered using best practices for adult education. Students in our instructor-led training programs have the opportunity to expand their skills and practice in team simulations. Using our HeartCode and RQI programs, students are able to reinforce their knowledge through online adaptive learning modules at their convenience while regularly practicing and improving the skills they perform. The third part of the U-STEAM formula equation is systems of care. Systems of care is constructing a process to get the right equipment and the right people with the right training to the patient at the right time. Data registries such as Get With The Guidelines help organizations to identify areas for improvement in their response to cardiac arrest. Telephone CPR programs help dispatchers to coach bystanders through giving CPR to cardiac arrest victims outside of the hospital until the ambulance arrives. The 2020 guidelines also highlight the need for effective recovery and mental health support plans for survivors. Activation of willing bystanders have always been a challenge, but recent improvements in technology enable mobile phone apps to be developed that can notify responders of an event near them so that they can respond and initiate CPR before arrival of the ambulance, a practice that significantly improves survival. Finally, new initiatives are being developed to support the willingness of the public to use the AED and perform CPR on a cardiac arrest victims. Now let's focus on the American Heart and who we are and what we do. The American Heart Association is dedicated to ensuring equitable health in all communities. Through collaboration with numerous organizations empowered by millions of volunteers, we fund innovative research, advocate for public health, and share life-saving resources. The Dallas-based organization has been a leading source of health information for nearly a century. As we already mentioned, heart disease is still a #1 killer in the US and worldwide. Stroke is a leading cause of disability and #5 killer in America and #2 killer globally. The American Heart Association has been a pioneer in cardiovascular research and preventive education programs to improve health and reduce deaths from heart disease and stroke. These are just a few of our achievements in our nearly 100-year history. The past fiscal year was like no other. The past fiscal year was like no other, so no one could have foreseen the rise. And as you can see, the problems that we're facing today, nearly half of US adults have high blood pressure. E-cigarette use among middle and high school students is reaching epidemic levels, but nearly half of the US population is expected to have some form of cardiovascular disease by 2035. So the past fiscal year was like no other. No one could have foreseen the rise of the coronavirus pandemic, the toll it would take on millions of people worldwide, the impact it would have on the economy and our life-saving work, despite taking swift action to limit and spending continuing fundraising. It became clear that the American Heart Association of the future would be different in order to continue to drive an impact and save lives in this new world. We challenged ourselves to fundamentally reinvent what we do and how we provide our prioritize our work. So how are we making this impact? The impact during the COVID pandemic, as you can see, has the American Heart Association working through research, leveraging science and relationships, meeting the needs of our healthcare workers, and teaching how to safely administer CPR. We deliver life-saving programs in 100 countries worldwide. With these statistics, we all see that we translate our life-saving training products in more than 10 languages and distribute them around the world. Since 2012, we're committed to more than $2.5 million to direct global research and studies. Every year we train 22 million people globally, first in first aid and CPR and AED every year. We develop guidelines for first aid and resuscitation training that are incorporated into our trainings globally. We offer a complete portfolio of resuscitation solutions for best-in-class education and continuous quality improvement. and we are the #1 research training provider for hospitals and emergency medical care services. Our training includes all categories that span from healthcare professionals to lay rescuers and non-healthcare professionals who need a card for job regulatory requirements, and those in general for the public who want to learn CPR. So these are some of our courses. We teach basic life support, advanced cardio life support, EP courses for experienced providers in advanced cardio life support, pediatrics assessment, emergency recognition, and we teach them for lay rescuers. We have programs for adult first aid, CPR, AED training, bloodborne pathogens, pediatric first aid. Digital transformation. So why digital right now? It goes without saying that 2020 is unlike any of what any of us would have predicted just a few short months ago. Whether we meet in person, virtually, or on a smaller group settings, we're committed to ensuring that our events continue to be safe, fun, and centered around saving and improving the lives of all. Furthermore, to meet the needs of a changing world, the American Heart Association is integrating digital technology to continue to maintain our mission globally. First of all, we need to emphasize that poor quality CPR is a preventable harm. Research has shown that psychomotor skills decline rapidly over time, and the current 2-year course completion card model does not lend itself to the maintenance of competence in CPR skills. The traditional model of training has been based on biannual training. Every 2 years, healthcare providers need to retake or renew their training to maintain their course completion card status. And then once every 5 years, AHA releases the CPR and ECC guidelines, which may include changes in the way AHA recommends that CPR be done. So there may be a refresher of content and skills required with those changes to our guidelines. Years ago, we theorized this may not be the most effective way to maintain CPR competency. You can see from this graphic that the competency of a provider decreases over time if they don't frequently practice or use their skills. We hypothesize that high-frequency, low-dose type of training solution might be more effective in maintaining healthcare providers' competency in performing what is largely a psychomotor skills. So today's new challenges require innovative solutions. American Heart Association is implementing a unique and effective way to deliver safe and effective CPR quality improvement. We have partnered with RQI Partners in Laerdal and to meet the needs of the changing world that is evolving in traditional healthcare education models. The AHA digital portfolio is a methodology of teaching that combines the latest technology, latest science, high quality CPR competence, and maximize the goal of life-saving outcomes. In the age of COVID-19, the AHA is rethinking CPR education delivery. The AHA digital resuscitation portfolio is becoming the preferred solution to deliver safe and effective CPR quality improvement. So the American Heart Association's Heart Code programs deliver quality resuscitation training through a more flexible delivery method. This method gives providers and administrators the more control of their time, schedules, and resources. I'd like to further emphasize that the obligation of the healthcare system is to ensure that their staff is trained in high-quality CPR. This represents the needs of healthcare systems. The recognized or unrecognized problems that can be resolved by Heart Code blended learning programs. The course delivered through your organization's LMS or through RQI Partners' own RQI Stop platform. The program delivers detailed debriefing after each online learning module and real-time audio and visual feedback during skill session to ensure learners are receiving the highest quality training possible. After completing their assigned course, learners earn an HA card valid for 2 years. So first, let's discuss Heart Code. It's intended for pre-hospital and in-facility audiences. The student must complete an online portion, which includes knowledge activities, adult and infant e-simulation scenarios with debriefing hyperlinks from debriefing to BLS student manual and multiple choice exam. The student then must complete a hands-on session and testing with either Heart Code voice-assisted mannequin or a live instructor or both. And once completed, both portions the student receives a completion card. Hardcode complete learning model, the student completes an online portion which includes knowledge activities as the previous model. The student then must complete a hands-on session and testing with an RQI simulation station. And once completed, both portions the student receives a completion card. The AHA science statement on resuscitation education made the following recommendation to achieve education efficacy as it relates to resuscitation. The journey to quality must incorporate mastery learning, use deliberate practice as a methodology, establish a performance goal for both mastery and deliberate practice, use overlearning for behaviors of what is likely to decay. Okay. So moving forward, when we look at the world today, what are we facing? How do we go from this to this? Necessity is the mother of all invention. Since the arrival of the novel coronavirus, the world has adapted in new and often incredible ways. The American Heart Association is no different, with innovative new virtual trainings underway now in many countries. So responding to the demand for continued high-quality training for CPR, AHA first piloted the idea as a means of resolving the problem of staff not being able to travel. The advantages to digital have been welcome. With an AHA expert participating via conferencing technology, we are able to provide guidance on real-time happenings in the classroom while ensuring that quality of programs is not reduced. The ability to record and play back classroom events is also useful. So going forward, the American Heart Association has included Russian translations to provide in-language courses to help the AHA training network in Russia. Students be assured, the world may change as a result of this pandemic, but the strong commitment the American Heart Association has to its programming instructors never will. The Russian translation is for the ACLS course and will be available soon and include the provider manuals, instructor manuals, course e-video, and written exams. Thank you for helping us reach our goal of a world where no one dies from cardiac arrest. Thank you. Спасибо.
Марида, большое спасибо за этот.
Thank you so much, Marida, for your brilliant report.
Если позволите, я задам один вопрос, и мы двинемся дальше, поскольку у нас достаточно много еще.
If you allow me just one question, and that's it. What is your opinion about AHA and RQA, the new models of different online versus hands-on experience? Do you think the efficiency of the new programs, will it be comparable to the standards courses that we had in the past, or maybe it will be even better than before? What is your forecast? What is your estimate of the efficacy? Okay, so did you hear the translation? Oh, you didn't hear the translation. Okay, so let me just tell you just once again, what do you think about the efficacy or the efficiency of the new blended courses, online modules plus hands-on? Do you think they will be just as effective as the old ones or the old approach, or maybe you forecast that the efficacy of the learning this way can even improve?
So yes, I do believe that there is a benefit in teaching in this way because the training is less, it doesn't take place every 2 years. So the students or the providers are less likely to have a decay in the skills. The online portion is based on an adaptive learning system. So it is tailored to the student and the knowledge that he has. Once the student completes that cognitive portion, he does come into the classroom with an instructor who teaches him the skills, has him practice regardless, and tests them and evaluates him. So I do feel that the blended learning is beneficial to the student, and it has many, many benefits. Less time in the classroom, which is something that we're really looking forward now with the pandemic. And also, we can help those healthcare providers, which now have a really difficult time doing any kind of training, just because they're so needed in the healthcare system, working towards, even this pandemic. So there's less time to be able to train, but it's so important to keep that training up and upkeep those skills so that the high quality doesn't decay over time.
Большое спасибо, Марида, за крайне интересный доклад.
Thank you so much, Marida, for this interesting report and for your viewpoint. And it is nice to hear that all of us on the European Resuscitation Association and the American Heart Associations are moving in the same direction in terms of the educational technologies. Can you hear the translation now? Can you hear the translation now? Marida, can you hear me? Can you hear? Marida, it is nice to hear that we all are moving in the same direction, both European Association and American Heart Associations are moving forward in the same direction.
The next report is called Training of Personnel for the Conditions of the Arctic Climate and Hazardous Regions. The report will be made by Dmitry Suslov. Please keep the timing. Hello, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to express the words of gratitude for inviting me to this unique conference, especially to Sergei Antipov and the Center for Corporate Medicine. I would like to briefly tell you about the Russian University of Elite Forces. And I will tell you about our experience of our expedition to the Arctic. This experience is quite unique and can be adopted to make some conclusions in remote healthcare. I'm a paramedic, a combat medic, and a mountain rescuer. And I'm a senior instructor. First of all, I would like to tell you a few words about the Russian University of the Russian Elite Forces. It is located in Chechen Republic in Gudermes city. It was established in 2013 upon the initiative of the hero Ravzan Kadyrov. This university is a non-educational institution. This is a private project, quite unique for the Russian Federation, where it is possible to arrange various and different trainings, since this training site has all the necessary conditions, equipment, and so on. The territory is 400 hectares, 95 buildings. Then we have the helicopter and an aircraft. To train different teams that provide assistance in rescue situations. This center was created for the needs of the Russian army to train special forces. There is a medical department, and I'm part of that department. There are 10 different courses for military personnel and for civil people. So these are the training sessions where we, as the Russian officers of elite forces, participated, like the Russian Guard officers and others that show their military functions in the Arctic region in adverse climatic conditions and remote places. The first training session was in archipelago Franz Josef, fully autonomous, 21 days. I made this in the chronological order so that you understand the difficulty of the expeditions. The sleep hours 8, and the average temperature is 30 degrees centigrade. We need to make sure that everybody stays healthy. In case somebody is injured or something happens to health, we need to take the necessary measures or ensure evacuation. Then there was a route on snowmobiles through the Lake Baikal in winter. It was also fully autonomous. It lasted 1,500 kilometers during 5 days. Number of sleep over 5 days is 30 hours. So the employees were getting tired and needed some nutrition in certain pharmacological means that would maintain their health and strength. And the unique route was in Dudinka and Dixon Island, fully autonomous. The length is 1,520 kilometers. We did this route on snowmobiles. It lasted 4 days. Number of sleep over 4 days, 18 hours. The average temperature is 34 degrees centigrade, below zero. What is the uniqueness of these training sessions? The expedition aimed not only at military skills, training the military skills, but also it was necessary to make some conclusions by the participants of the expedition. Our task was to collect and study the information that was necessary, particularly for us, how to provide medical assistance in -40, how to avoid some traumas and injuries and some negative consequences for the body. So these are some pictures from our expeditions. This is the Lake Baikal. The food and fuel was always with us. So this is how we slept. And you see that during all these events, there were people that got sick and people that were injured, but thanks God everything was without casualties. So the last expedition was this transition to the Dixon Island. We also simulated the icebreaker invasion, so we had to save people and so on. So it was quite interesting and challenging. Of course, I'm talking more about the expedition medicine, as we call it. Not when a medic is at a remote site at his office, medical room, with all the necessary means available. But I'm talking about the medics that are autonomously traveling with a group and need to provide the emergency care. When a medic is part of the expedition. There are three important aspects here. Training before the expedition, during the expedition, maintaining the health and state of people, and post-expedition. Pre-expedition training including the following: selection of people in terms of their moral and volitional qualities, medical checkups 2 weeks before the expedition itself, elimination of all the dental issues, because in case something happens in a remote place, the only way out is to remove a tooth. There is no way to treat it. Training in highlands with the temperature close to the Arctic environment. The entire group, including myself, went to the mountains where it was very cold, windy, a lot of snow. The environment was quite the same as in the Arctic. So this teaches us to survive in these adverse conditions. So a person is preparing his body, his organism for a hard expedition. Then we checked all the machines, equipment, clothes and shoes, because if something breaks during the expedition, this will again impact your health, like trauma and something else. There were some training sessions on how to render first aid treatment and training on the adaptation of a person to extremely low temperatures. Because this is very important for people to understand and realize where they are going and what might happen with them and what measures they should take in case someone is injured, or in case of an emergency, like a person is lost, how to survive along, what to do, how to burn a fire, how to hide from snow, and so on. We made a lot of conclusions. I will not tell all of them, because some of them are for military purposes only, like medical supply. What shall you do if the person is bleeding and you need to get some additional blood? How to do this in the Arctic? How to heat blood and get it to the person at -30 or 40 degrees? So we teach transfusion also in extreme conditions. Water, personal hygiene. The example with water, like when we were doing this route with snowmobiles to the Dixon Island, halfway during a day, a person drank 9 liters per day. And I was following this. If a person didn't do this, the level of his reaction and stamina would be low. When the people were going to the toilet, I was checking the color of their urine in order to understand what is happening to their health.
Конечно, с этим более подготовлены.
Again, our employees are well prepared and we know where we are working and we are ready for everything. So we have all the necessary equipment with us, additional batteries and so on. So the survival kit, guidelines for adaptation in the Arctic, and assistance in case of trauma. What were the difficulties? There were too many, of course. Many of colleagues today mentioned already some of them. Besides the Arctic environment, there were unsafe conditions. So the difficulty for such a medic that is part of the Arctic expedition, for example, or a dangerous environment, there are some negative elements, like I'm talking about humans, terrorists, bandits, and so on. Some political situations can be quite adverse, or the population may also affect somehow a medic or a place of his location. So these are the major difficulties. These are some issues or recommendations that we designed for medical personnel that is going for such expeditions or works in extreme conditions like wilderness medicine, BLS, prolonged field care, which is also very important, and some people forget about this. When under limited resources, you are with an injured person for several days and you have to do something. Telemedicine and adaptation and survival in the climate techniques. This is an example of the training session. I'm showing this to our employees how to get out of extremely cold water. So this is a backpack with all the equipment, with all the weapons. The temperature was minus 52. Later, there was a training when the icebreaker is when moving, leaving a trace, and a person may fall down underwater easily. So this training was very useful for the guys that were part of the expedition. If this was a real situation, but if they were trained in advance how to survive in case something similar happens, they would be. They told us that they would not spend too much time and they will not be hurt or injured that much as they did. So these are the objectives of staff training in extreme and dangerous conditions. There are three major factors: psychological training, physical training, and professional training. Physical training is also very important because it affects many aspects, especially in remote locations. These are the three pillars of training. I would like to show you one short video. The 4 days, the people were. The video is very emotional and inspiring, so please have a look and you will see everything.
Как вы видите, тренинг проводится при любой погоде.
As you see, the trainings are done in any weather conditions. In December, for example, this was done in, this is the hypothermia and how to warm up yourself. The training lasts 4 days, and during 2 nights they sleep only 3 hours. In order to create such conditions, such adverse conditions, so that we want them to feel as close to the real conditions as possible. This is this simulation of different attacks, and each trainee has an opportunity to train his medical skills. I believe this is very important and very impressive, because this trains both psychological, professional, and physical abilities of people. During this course, the guys had to carry an injured person more than 10 kilometers. So this is a physical test. It is as close to the real conditions as possible. If you are professionally ready, but if you are physically unfit, you will not be able to save a person, for example. They are doing this with medical toolkit in their backpack. Imagine that such type of help is the most complicated, because you are limited in resources, you are limited in people, the environment, the surrounding environment, it's quite adverse. That is all. Thank you for your attention. I'm ahead of schedule already. Thank you for your attention again.
Будут ли вопросы?
Do we have any questions? I have one short question. Dmitry, can you tell us, you demonstrated a video on the training of your people. Are there any Russian programs in Russia that are approved and certified training programs, I mean, and what is the potential for further development? This is a good question. Unfortunately, military medical training, not even at a zero, but at a -0 level, compared to Western and European countries in America. Pre-hospital stage includes training and equipment. These courses, our courses, since I passed my training abroad, this is based on the international course that I passed in America. Combat Lifesaver, this is the next course, more advanced, on tactical medicine. Unfortunately, at the moment, the level of military medical training is quite low, but we need to strive for improvement. We need to send our workers abroad, but instructors, to pass their training abroad, where the advanced programs and means of training are used. Because right now we're using the obsolete equipment to stop blood, for example. So there are no certified programs in Russia. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dmitry. I think in the future we need to collaborate all together your military community and our medical institutions, because you're probably a very unique structure, and you will definitely help us to improve the training in terms of the first aid treatment and the training in remote locations and so on. Let's move further. Dear colleagues, we have a few more reports left.
Speaking about the programs, training programs, educational programs, today we're going to listen to Matthew Walter, who is the head of the School of Medicine, Dentistry and Nursing of the University of Glasgow. He is a professor and honorable consultant. Доброе утро, дамы и господа. Я с вами сегодня нахожусь виртуально, и я являюсь главой школы медицины, сестринского дела и стоматологии. Сегодня тема, на которую я хотел бы с вами поговорить, это разработка обучающей программы для удаленного здравоохранения. Чтобы ввести вас в контекст, я бы хотел сказать о том, что я работаю в университете Глазго, глава школы медицины, как я сказала. У нас очень хорошая репутация. Мы очень высокие позиции в рейтингах Великобритании по медицинскому образованию занимаем. Сейчас на втором месте.
To regain number one spot next year. So I'm going to talk about some work we've been doing recently with the International Remote Healthcare Association, led by Professor Nelson Norman, who many of you I'm sure will know. I lead the research and the academic subgroup of the International Remote Healthcare Association, and we have been charged by Nelson with responsibility for the development and the delivery of a curriculum for remote healthcare workers with a view to improve the delivery of healthcare to those working far from urban centres or conventional centres of medical care. The objective and the vision is for this curriculum to be evidence-based, that is informed by current practice and by the demands that we know are placed upon healthcare providers in these circumstances. It has to be compatible with ongoing evolution of remote working, so different technologies being used, potentially a different spectrum of injuries and difficulties being encountered. It needs to be fit for purpose. It needs to be credible. In other words, adopted by, recognized by agencies involved in the regulation of healthcare internationally to reflect the international context of the delivery of this care. And it needs to be delivered at high quality and also at scale, because we know the demand is significant. So a significant task for us to develop a curriculum of this nature. The challenges that we face, particularly in achieving these objectives, firstly, we know that the needs of those requiring healthcare will evolve. As I've mentioned, the technology changes the spectrum of difficulties that might be encountered in remote circumstances. Some remain the same, but other new challenges arise, and our curriculum needs to be sighted on that and able to deal with that. We know that the case mix may change with time. We know that different types of people are traveling to remote environments to work, and we need to ensure that our curriculum reflects the different age spectrums, for example, of people who might be working in remote environments and who therefore might require healthcare of various sorts. We need to be absolutely confident that the delivery of healthcare reflects the abilities that we now have and we continue to evolve in telemedicine and teleradiology, for example, which has been an increasingly important part of remote healthcare over the last few decades. And it's very likely that as technology continues to improve, robotic surgery and various other developments, for example, telemedicine and teleradiology will continue to be an ever more important part of the delivery of remote healthcare. When we consider the curriculum, we need to make sure it's properly contextualized. So, for example, the spectrum of problems that might be encountered in a very remote Arctic environment, for example, might differ significantly from those encountered on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, for example. So we need to contextualize the curriculum and make sure that it is fit for purpose in whatever circumstance in which it's applied. And we also need to ensure that, as I've mentioned before, it's credible, that it's properly endorsed by appropriate international entities, and that it is robustly assessed. Because like all healthcare, what we don't want to do is to give people credentials to deliver treatment that they're not actually capable of delivering, because that serves nobody's interests, indeed is dangerous and negligent. So we face significant challenges in developing a curriculum of this nature. It's not a new idea, it's been attempted before. This is a paper dating a few years now from the IRHC, which intended to define a list of competencies that healthcare practitioners in remote environments, in this case specifically oil and gas operations, would require. Now, it was a good attempt. It's a well-written document, and certainly it's comprehensive, but there are a number of weaknesses that we aim to overcome with our new project. Firstly, this is a Delphi study. This is a group of people sat in a room giving their opinions, but this is not, strictly speaking, an evidence-based curriculum. I mentioned before that technology evolves quite quickly, and this is now a number of 7 years old altogether. So it may be that the information contained in this curriculum, which hasn't been revised or updated since 2015, is now out of date. And perhaps as a consequence of these things, this document has not been widely recognized, widely adopted, and doesn't really inform current clinical practice or clinical training. So we are intending to develop a proper evidence-based curriculum and to approach it in a scientific fashion using modern pedagogical techniques. And these are the sorts of questions that we need to address when we're considering designing a new curriculum. What sort of healthcare worker do we want? So what skills and abilities do we want these people to be imbued with? What degree of autonomy should they have? How should we train them? What techniques should we be using? I think it's quite clear that there'll be a significant amount of practical skill required for these people, and lots of simulation, I suspect, will be required in upskilling and imbuing these people with the talents and the abilities that we want them to have. We need certainly to make sure that our curriculum is fit for purpose, and that those external agencies, and particularly the employers of these individuals, are engaged in the development of the curriculum and have confidence that people who hold the qualification that we propose to put in place will be sufficiently skilled to undertake the work for which they are employed. What learning outcomes should we include? And this is really the first question we're looking to address. So what are the important medical issues that we need to make sure our people are capable of dealing with? Assessment techniques are obviously evolving all the time, and we need to make sure that the assessment techniques we choose are robust, credible, and fit for purpose. And in the longer term, it's not just a question of passing an exam and going out into the field. We need to continue to evaluate our practitioners and to make sure they retain the skills that they have, and that any new skills they may require are available to be taught to them. So a large number of issues with regard to the considerations that we have as we design this curriculum. And we can look at this through a number of filters. This is one way of assessing the ways in which people learn and how we might best approach giving these practitioners potentially some new skills. So we have learning on the job, and we have classroom-based learning away from the field. We have the conscious acquisition of new knowledge through either sort of structured learning or taking opportunities in the context of employment. But we also have the unconscious absorption of new information and new techniques. And an effective curriculum should really attempt to harness all of these methods with a view to maximizing the chance of producing a highly effective practitioner in the circumstances that we want them to work in. We need also to be careful about how we integrate the teaching and the assessment. And I've alluded to this before. We need to define what the learning outcomes are going to be. We then need to make sure that we use the appropriate teaching methodologies, and that could be classroom-based, it could be on-the-job learning, it could be simulation, in order to deliver these skills and this knowledge. We then need to assess it robustly and thoroughly. And then in the longer term, we need to evaluate not only the practitioners whom we've trained, but also the curriculum that we're putting in place to make sure that they and it remain fit for purpose and capable of doing what we want them to do. And again, it's not just a question of devising a curriculum, making it evidence-based and implementing it. We need to be sure that we continue to evaluate and iterate our curriculum, because things change, circumstances change, case mix changes, technology changes, both the technology with which these the people working in remote environments will be working, but also the technology available to the remote healthcare practitioners. That will, we hope, continue to evolve. And therefore, having implemented the curriculum, we need to continue to follow what's called the curricular cycle, defined by Peyton and Peyton more than 20 years ago, assessing the emerging needs, designing and implementing the changes to the curriculum, and then assessing the output of that change, and to continue to follow the curricular cycle. So this isn't just a one-off piece of work. This is going to be a long-term iterative process, implementing a curriculum, evaluating it and adjusting it iteratively as needs change. So how are we going to approach this in practical terms? Well, in the first instance, we propose a series of concurrent PhD projects undertaken by clinicians with an interest in education and in remote healthcare. This will be a series of projects that will be supervised by medical universities, certainly my own university, the University of Glasgow, and hopefully other universities will come on board and be able to offer supervision. We will obviously from the start be engaging with the relevant appropriate authorities. So in the UK, the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow, for example, will be approached, other royal colleges, and also the regulatory agencies, both in the UK and elsewhere in the rest of the world where we're intending to implement the curriculum. So this will be a lot of work. We'll be talking to lots of different stakeholders and external agencies as we develop this. And we will need, obviously, to contextualize the work of each PhD project to a particular region, because as I've mentioned, the spectrum of problems encountered by individuals working in Siberia, for example, will be quite different from those working in the Gulf of Mexico. So we will need to look at different regions of the world separately, and we envisage that these will be the focus of different PhD projects. So each PhD will evaluate the frequency of instant medical issues, problems, emergencies, and also the consequences of these. We'll be focusing each PhD on one region or one environment, and we'll also be building into the evaluation the availability of additional adjunctive resources that could be used by healthcare practitioners, such as availability of telemedicine and proximity to centres of medical treatment. And the intention is to define, in the first instance, the learning outcomes of a programme that's going to be entirely evidence-based, in contrast to that which has gone before, totally fit for purpose, and also endorsed by the relevant agencies in the UK, in Europe, and across the world. So that concludes all I have to say about this. I've had a short period of time, and I hope I've conveyed the message clearly. There is an unmet need for a defined medical curriculum to improve the provision of healthcare across the world in remote areas. The IRHA is working towards the development and delivery of such a curriculum, although we're at the very early stages just now. It's a pleasure to be able to share this idea with an audience such as this, and we're obviously in listening mode and very keen to hear any comments or suggestions that you may have. And if any suggestions arise, my email address at the University of Glasgow is shown there. So that concludes all I have to say. All that remains is to thank you all very much indeed for your attention. And I hope at some more propitious time, when the pandemic has faded away, I'll be able to meet you all in person. So thank you once again for your attention.
Благодарим Мэтью Уолтерса за доклад. Поскольку
Thank you, Mr. Walters, for your report. But since it was already a pre-recorded report, then it actually, we don't have online connection with Matthew. Then you can leave your questions either in the chat or per email. Okay, so the next
A report will be devoted to remote healthcare curriculum. The report will be made by Malcolm Valentine from Great Britain.
I have entitled this presentation with a suitable saying as featured in the title slide. Knowledge increases by sharing, but not by saving, and never has this comment been more pertinent. Slide 2, please. I can bring the subject even closer to many attendees' hearts with my second quote, this time by a Russian. A man can only attain knowledge with the help of those who possess it. This must be understood from the very beginning. One must learn from him who knows. There you go. So this presentation is all about the sharing of knowledge across the broadest spectrum of international remote healthcare. There remains a very great gap in both the willingness to share knowledge and the vehicles for doing so. Only through sharing knowledge will it be possible to establish the core role and activity of the remote healthcare practitioner, and in turn for both the curriculum and the content of training to be properly defined. This is a dynamic process. It will never be complete. Additionally, there then needs to be a vehicle that can contribute to continuing professional development, so that practitioners can continue to learn and develop by sharing experiences freely and thus advancing the overall reservoir of knowledge and skill. Historically, one of the most important cross-industry and trans-company studies to try and audit remote medical activity was carried out in Aberdeen in the mid-1980s. A brief resume paper of this work was published in 1988, and I refer to that paper, Medical Evacuations from Offshore Structures. This study uniquely accessed the historical medical records of 4 offshore companies working on the UK continental shelf. It comprised all sectors of the shelf, the North Sea sector, South North Sea sector, and even Morecambe Bay to the west. It covered both oil and gas exploration and production companies. 2,162 evacuations for clinical reasons from 1976 to 1984 were studied, including 137, 7.7%, where unscheduled helicopter evacuation was needed. Slide 3, please. Amongst other findings, it was noted in the earlier years, more injuries than illness were noted as reasons for evacuation, but by 1980, this had equalised. Hand and eye injuries comprised 25% of all evacuations, possibly predictably. Dental problems, interestingly, comprised 5% of all evacuations, that's 1 in 20. The mean age for injuries was less at 28.3 years than the mean age of illness, which was 34.4 years. Even at the time of the study, focused training was just starting for the then termed offshore medic, as in theory only a first aid certificate was truly required to work as a medic. It was also true that many medics were ex-forces and highly trained and skilled in trauma management, less so coping with medical issues, which clearly were becoming more prevalent in the workload even by then. Early effects of the study included properly embedding bespoke training programs for medics at the Centre for Offshore Health in Aberdeen, and for those training programs to become progressively more focused on the acquisition of medical knowledge and skill. Also, for many years, UKOOA, that's the Oil and Gas UK Medical Advisory Committee, insisted dental certification be provided in medically assessing workers for offshore. This eventually wiped out the need to evacuate for dental problems. Progress continued on the evolution of medic training programs. But what has been done since? This study is 40 years old. Has any similar work been done, or is any similar work being proposed? What about continuous data gathering? There is no doubt that within individual companies involved in remote activities, there is now extensive data gathering, audit, critical review and feedback to individual healthcare practitioners. There may even be instances now of specific retraining in identified knowledge or skill gap areas. But what are the prospects for cross-cutting understanding? How much of the internal audit and measuring is shared out with the organisation? how much internal audit and knowledge is then available for external training providers to inform the design of their programmes, and how much of this information is made available for external study and research and peer review. Over the years, bodies such as the International Remote Healthcare Association and other professional groups have attempted to keep the issue at the forefront of remote healthcare thinking, and informally have sought to share information through conferences and the IRHCA journal. But this activity still remains at a relatively low level, considering the extent of the level of international remote healthcare activity now. Slide 4, please. The recent publication, Remote Medicine, a textbook, edited by Professor Norman and myself, attempts to provide a supportive textbook for the remote healthcare practitioner, but also seeks to establish, especially within the general medical practice section, a basic knowledge and skills inventory for remote practice. But these elements still need to be tested for validity, given that much of the information was sourced parallel to remote healthcare activity rather than being derived from it. So such a textbook would have even greater impact if it was possible to tie it even more closely to what was actually being experienced in remote healthcare. Further, especially in the energy industry, there is a need to more closely examine the specific attributes a medic might need to address in the future of clinical care for those working, for instance, within the wind power industries, the wave power industries, and even in future nuclear industries, including nuclear fusion. Much work remains to be done. And what about continuing professional development? CPD can cover a huge breadth of activity. It is a fundamental principle of adult learning that the content and methods should be meaningful to the individual. By means of examples of CPD activity, I have suggested personal study in the creation of personal learning records, reflection on situations that occur in normal work, for instance, significant events, memorable events, or unusual events, reflection on patient unmet needs and how to respond to them, clinical and system audit, writing up, learning and publishing, and also personal development portfolios. And I will forever reinforce the point about preparedness to write up and publish material, preferably in an accessible journal that can be shared widely among the breadth of the remote healthcare community. After many years of involvement, I have no absolute solution to offer. But for all those many years, I have identified that the sharing of knowledge is paramount. So the question remains, what are you, the participant, prepared to do to enhance this sharing of knowledge? Slide 5, please. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your interesting report. This is a question to the audience that was mentioned at the end of the report. So we shall move further in our agenda. We have 2 reports. And right now it's my pleasure to present the next speaker.
It's Dr. Harry Horsley, who is the medical advisor for the BP. And the topic of his report is the role, scope, and practice of perceived educational needs of offshore medics in the UK continental shelf. Please go ahead, Mr. Horsley.
Everyone, chair, panel delegates, both in Tomsk and throughout the world. Thank you for inviting me to the conference. First of all, my background is not as a doctor, but as an occupational health nurse. And I've been involved in remote healthcare for quite some time now, since being recruited by Professor Norman to work with the Antarctic Survey very early on, and then subsequently been a university lecturer for 10 years. But I've also worked for 2 periods in the North Sea as a medic. And that's going to be the theme of my talk now. My presentation is based on a master's project which I undertook some years ago, which asked a large number of remote practitioners working in the United Kingdom, continental shelf, about what their role actually was, about their actual exposure to medical events and patient consultations, and also how they viewed the adequacy of the training they received, and crucially, what they perceived their needs to be. Can you see my screen all right?
Well, we don't actually.
Press green button share screen,
Yeah.
and then blue button sharing.
Yeah.
Yes, now we see your screen and slideshow, please.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
So just to give you the international delegates some context on the United Kingdom continental shelf. Basically, when I talk about the continental shelf, it's the entire sea around the UK, but most of the oil and gas comes from the North Sea. The southern sector here is mainly gas production as well as the Irish Sea, but in the central and North Sea, it's mainly oil and gas. And it's a very important industry in the UK. It employs about 30,000 people, full-time equivalents, in the actual North Sea, but many thousands more onshore. The background is that the reason there is a North Sea industry goes back to 1967 and 73, when the Arab-Israeli wars produced an increase in the price of oil, and that politically and financially justified drilling in the North Sea, where extraction costs are very high. And these are some of the landmarks. 1965 was the discovery of first gas. 10 years later, first oil produced. And then in 1981, oil production exceeded consumption. But now it's declining, and we have to import about roughly half our oil and gas from abroad. The background to healthcare in the North Sea is that the National Health Service has no authority there, and it is the Health and Safety Executive, the HSE, that is the responsible government agency for healthcare in the North Sea. And the law, the legislation which governs it, was introduced in 1989, and this is it, the Offshore Installation Pipeline Works Regulations. It sets out that anyone working as a medic, and this is what we call remote practitioners, they must have either a nursing, military, or similar suitable background. So that includes operating department assistants, paramedics, etc. So it's a very mixed background. To work offshore, to get a license, you need 4 weeks initial training, and that includes 1 week with a general practitioner and 1 week in accident emergency. And then every 3 years, they must undertake 2 weeks of refresher training. Since the development of the offshore industry, there's been huge advances in safety, and this graph, these statistics demonstrate the reduction in the number of injuries. A very busy graph, but just look at the red line. This is the rate of injury per 100,000 full-time equivalent workers. And over the 15 years that this graph demonstrates, the incidence has actually roughly halved. And this trend was picked up, as my colleague Malcolm Valentine was indicating. This trend was picked up at a very early stage by Professor Norman and colleagues, who in the early 90s looked at the reasons for evacuation, medical evacuation from offshore installations, and saw this trend of injury declining and illness increasing emerge. And that trend has continued ever since then. So injury now accounts for a very low proportion of the reasons for medical encounters offshore. The survey that I undertook several years ago now was based on a master's project, and there were 4 objectives to it. One was to establish a map of offshore medics in the United Kingdom continental shelf, and the reason I had to do that I'll come to later on. The second was to look at the demographic data, for instance, what age they were, whether they were male, female, how many years they'd worked offshore, their background, whether they were military or nursing. And then the scope of practice, what they actually did. And that were things such as how much trauma or serious medical events they saw, what other health-related activities they undertook offshore, the frequency with which they undertook certain interventions, particularly the advanced life support interventions such as CPR, defibrillation, airway management. And also another aspect which requires frequent practice, examination, i.e. listening to chests, testing reflexes, examining eyes. And the 4th objective was their perceived educational needs. So asking them exactly what they felt their education needs were, such as the perceived adequacy of the initial and refresher courses, the content of them, how well they prepared them for working offshore, the perceived adequacy of the interval, the 3-yearly interval between refresher courses, and any suggestions as to continuing professional development. I undertook the collection of data by postal questionnaire for a variety of reasons, rather than online. And I aimed to include all the medics who were working offshore at the time. But I soon discovered that there was no central health and safety executive register or database. And the information I needed really was held by medic training providers and employment agencies, but they wouldn't release that because of commercial sensitivity. So I ended up actually approaching individual operating companies and constructing my own database. The response rate was relatively good, 44%, and I got 101 questionnaires returned. Of those, 84 were males and 17 females, and the median age was 45 years old. And the median number of years of offshore experience was 10. Significantly, female medics who were significantly younger and had fewer years of offshore experience than males, and that reflects the very low number of females offshore and the fact that they don't find, I think, that environment very welcoming. In terms of qualifications, 32% of the respondents had a military medical background and 68 had a nursing qualification. Over 60% of them had secondary roles other than medical, and that included administrative or safety management. The number of patient encounters in the case of serious ill health or injury were very, very low, and the frequency with which they had to perform emergency procedures such as advanced life support was again very low. And most respondents estimated that injury accounted for fewer than 10% of consultations. And in the 4 weeks prior to the questionnaire, I asked, how many patient encounters have you had? And the results were quite surprising. So over half reported fewer than 12 patient encounters per week, and only 30% reported 10 to 25 patient encounters per week. So all of this points to a very low medical workload and the issue of skill decay, and that's where training comes in. So in terms of the adequacy of training, most respondents said that they felt that the initial and refresher training content was adequate, but it very much depended on their own backgrounds. So if they'd worked in accident emergency, they were comfortable with trying that. But a nurse who had worked with the care of the elderly, for instance, that would be a very steep learning curve. There was some indication of differences in standards between training providers, and that's a well-known phenomenon amongst the population. And skill decay was a major issue. 55 out of 78 respondents wanted more frequent, shorter duration updates rather than 2 weeks every 3 years. When asked about the quality of support from doctors onshore when they had a problem, the majority expressed satisfaction with the service that they used. There were some comments, however, as to some variability, some variations that support, i.e. delays in speaking with a doctor, and quite worryingly, some doctors' unfamiliarity with the offshore environment. So all of those previous results have been quantitative questions. I did leave space for general comments, and several themes were discernible when I undertook qualitative analysis. One was their perceived low status in the offshore industry, a desire for increased professional recognition and interaction, some less administration or other non-medical duties as secondary roles, and an issue about the majority of medics working as contractors or through an agency rather than as a staff position, and the power position that put in with management. So the big issues for me was that there is no register, and there still isn't, of health and safety executive accredited medics. Skill decay is a very big issue, and the frequency of refresher training and CPD needs. Professional isolation, ensuring that they receive appropriate medical support, and monitoring the quality control of training course providers. So registration really, I think, is a public protection issue, because if there is no means of withdrawing the HSE license and debarring them from practice, then that really is a very big public protection issue. And with registration, that would allow professional recognition and development. And without registration, there can be no real effective regulation of these practitioners who work offshore. So thank you very much. If there's any questions, then I can take them later on.
Благодарю за доклад.
Thank you for your report. We are waiting for the questions from our colleagues. Yes, we do have a question. We do have a question. Thank you so much, Professor Horsley. We do have one question about the preparation. Is there special training in the UK for the sailors in the UK vessels, for the vessels in the UK? So special training for the maritime medicine.
My specialist area, but I believe that what we would call seafarers, sailors, I think they all have to undergo basic first aid training, and then senior officers undergo a training course, which is called the Masters Medical Training. So anyone who has a license as a first officer or a captain has to have that training, and I believe that's a 5-day training course. And generally speaking, on British vessels, it is the first officer who has responsibility for the medical management.
Спасибо за доклад.
Thank you for your report and for answering the question. Are there any more questions? No more questions offline. Since I do not hear any questions, we do have one more report, and we will dive into 14 minutes in our break. And David Page is about to present. David Page from the USA, from the IMT associations, the paramedics associations.
Пожалуйста.
Hello, greetings from the United States. My name is David Page, and I am the director of the Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum at UCLA. I'm an affiliate faculty member for the National Association of EMTs and do a lot of work internationally for NAEMT. I also teach in the paramedic program at the Center for Pre-Hospital Care at UCLA, part of the David Geffen School of Medicine, and currently a paramedic at Allina Health and adjunct faculty member, senior lecturer at Monash University in Australia. It is an honor to be with you, even if it's remotely, to discuss really a wonderful association that I've been a part of since 1987. I've actually been teaching NAEMT courses since that time. I took the pre-hospital trauma life support course in 1987 and just fell in love with it. Our organization has 72,000 members and growing. It was formed in 1975. And we're proud to have amongst our ranks practitioners of pre-hospital care of all sorts of training. So paramedics, EMTs, physicians, nurses, anyone really involved in out-of-hospital care, or paramedicine as some are calling it now. NAEMT focuses on education and advocacy, research. We really want to advance our profession based on evidence. And our mission is to improve the quality of care. Really, that's both by supporting our members that are professionals and also by providing quality education that is essential to delivering the best care possible based on the latest standards. We are led by a board of directors. This is an elected board, and there are 18 staff members. We have 14 different committees and volunteer coordinators. I'm a member of the education committee, as an example. We participate in all sorts of advocacy for education and also for changes in legislation here in the United States. We are partners with a great variety of organizations that also represent physicians, firefighters, fire chiefs, emergency managers, government entities, as well as ambulance associations and healthcare officials. We also spend a bit of time in Washington, D.C., along with our colleagues trying to improve the laws that help protect our profession and help patients, as well as finding funding and preparedness for disasters, pandemics like the one we've been living in this past year. Our education is really what I'm here to talk to you about mostly. It is comprised of 12 different courses. They're really wonderful, and I wish I could spend all my time just talking about each one, and I would never stop. We have a catalog that actually describes these in great detail, but and it's available online at naemt.org. But I really want to tell you what they mean to me. And some of these courses, I think, are really a part of how we do our work in the U.S. I, for example, have worked for ambulance services that required PHTLS before you started to work. It's a bit like BLS or CPR certification, where everyone knows, and ACLS, where everybody knows how to interact with each other. We know what the latest techniques are for teamwork and crew resource management for culture of safety. We advance with the latest techniques. When tourniquets, we found out, were better than just putting direct pressure, we immediately put those into the course. And the courses are highly specialized in some cases, and also a mixture of both active learning, such as participation in group discussion or cases, and a lot of simulation. We really think that hands-on learning and being able to interact with instructors and think critically is the most important. So we use the latest education techniques, which I'm very proud of in our education committee, to infuse those in all of the courses that we do. We also encourage people to practice safely. You see everybody here in personal protection, outside, in the environments that we're actually going to be working with the tools and the equipment that we're actually going to be working with. PHTLS is our longest standing course. We've had this, like I said, I took it in 1987 and started teaching it thereafter. It's a minimum of 16 hours, but you can teach it in many more hours. As an example, in some of the universities and paramedic programs here, it's taught throughout the entire semester, and the textbook is used as the trauma course textbook, at the end of which we actually give the final exam and certification. There are hundreds of simulations that are wonderful, but we always say a minimum of 16 hours is what's needed, especially if it's continuing education. We simulate the patient in whatever environment, including the ambulance. So this is not just a class that you would take and sit in a classroom for. We want to get students out of their seats. We have opportunities to do scenarios to start with, and then concentrate on what techniques we can improve upon if people are taking it, for example, as a continuing education course. All of our courses can be tailored to the specific protocols for the area that we're in. I've taught them, as in the case for advanced medical life support, which is more critical thinking, kind of a detective course of differential diagnosis. And we've taught this in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. We had a wonderful course, as well as in the Philippines and in Mexico and Colombia. These are amazing courses that where teams of people, even if they're different levels of training, can collaborate to care for a patient and learn about very important complaints and how to create differential diagnoses. Of course, pediatrics is so important, and we have a robust program for pediatric care, as well as, this is in partnership with the American Academy of Pediatricians. And this course, I think, is wonderful because so many people are so uncomfortable with children, and it's very needed. One of our newer courses is the All Hazards course. This is a course that's dedicated to organizing a disaster or a group of people who are going to respond to the disaster, learning to plan for what the community might need. In Mexico, that might be an earthquake. In the Philippines, it might be a monsoon, or we think about what that community needs, and then we actually do a simulated disaster if we plan ahead and have time for it. So again, just a wonderful course on the how to manage disasters and all types of hazards. Another wonderful course, psychological trauma in EMS patients, a bit of psychological first aid, how to deal with the emotional components. And I love the geriatric course, for example. We have, this is a course where we have our students actually walk around with rocks in their shoes, and we put tape on their fingers to really simulate what it feels like to get old, like me. I've been doing this for 35 years, and so I can tell you that the bones, you know, the ambulance crashes, it feels like it's, you know, been a while. So having these young students actually experience what it's like to lose a bit of your sight with eyeglasses that have some fog in them and not have the mobility really teaches them to live and empathize with people who are older patients. So the GEMS, or Geriatric EMS course, is just a phenomenal course. And of course, our safety is incredible. The ethics and leadership is badly needed, I think, in our profession. Fascinating to talk about ethics. We have courses that are specifically for law enforcement responders and firefighters or military, like the TCCC course as the tactical combat course. We hope we don't need those things, but here, for example, we had a lot of civil unrest and had to learn to work in very dangerous environments. So these are really amazing. The First on Scene course is dedicated just for the initial person who arrives at the scene. And there is an extensive community paramedic, also mobile integrated health is a name we use for that. And if the vehicle operator course, that I can't express I wish I could show you some of the videos. These are not, this is not learning to drive fast, but it's learning to drive safely. It's really just a wonderful combination of different disciplines and courses that give us a great enrichment and technique and competencies, all of them evidence-based, all of them updated. We have specific committees that update these guidelines based on international standards and go out of our way to look for the latest evidence, evaluate it, and put it into practice in these courses, as well as looking at consensus statements and finding just exactly what is the best way forward to teach this. So latest teaching techniques, latest information in the courses, along with materials that are really well put together. Our national and international training centers are intended to, so if you're wanting to teach this, you would become an NAEMT training center. And we launch the course usually as a provider course, and then the instructors can take it as a student, and then they teach the class and we help them. So as an affiliate faculty member, I observe and assist and learn from them actually most of the time about how wonderful they do with their courses. And that's how the NAEMT training centers begin to teach their own courses. And these certifications really blossom. People are very proud to have them and proud to have the knowledge and get the knowledge updated. It's been, these courses have been translated in many different languages, and it's really wonderful to see them continue to grow. So there's usually a coordinator of the training center, and it doesn't cost anything to become a training center. And in fact, many of the training centers actually provide courses for a fee. So in some cases that is done at very low cost. In some cases it's done in a super amazing way for people who can afford it, with costs then paid for by the students. But we are a nonprofit organization, and we really want to get our education to be available to the most number of pre-hospital providers that we can. I again want to just thank our partners. The American College of Surgeons has been an amazing partner with the PHT, or Pre-Hospital Trauma Committee. And nor I can't do a presentation about NAEMT without talking about our great Norm McSwain. Dr. McSwain has contributed so much to PHTLS in particular, and helped us launch this platform of wonderful courses that are available to you to teach in your country. The American Academy of Pediatrics, again, having the NAEMSP, the National Association of EMS Physicians, the National Registry. These are all organizations that help us here and are partners with us in these courses to make them that much better and have their stamp of approval. It was wonderful to join you. I hope you have questions that we can answer. Please contact NAEMT directly at naemt.org. and I'm just thrilled that you're doing this conference. We very much need to work together across the world to improve pre-hospital care. Thank you, and I hope this was very helpful.
Благодарим за доклад.
Thank you for your report. We increased the time of our session, but the report was very interesting, and it is a pleasure and an honor for us to have a specialist from the United States, because this country offers wide opportunities for a variety of aspects. I would like to remind you that you can write your questions in the chat, and then we will give these questions to the speakers. So to sum up, I would like to say that the discussion was quite fruitful, international. We discussed evidence-based medicine, training of medics in remote sites. I'm thankful to all the speakers, the audience, and as I suggest we have a short break and then continue according to our agenda. Thank you.